Well, the first week or so, Palmer's like, yeah, go ahead. Of course, we've known each other and worked with. He knew I was capable of doing the job and everything. He's like, go ahead and drive tonight. He's like, you're not supposed to really drive yet, but go ahead and drive. Well, it's probably because he wanted to take a nap while I was driving. Anyway, he's like, yeah, go ahead and drive. Well, I'll be darned. We got in a vehicle pursuit. This was like a week or so in and I'd been in vehicle pursuits before I came to work here, so that wasn't really any big deal or anything. But then, of course, they pull over and they bail out and take off running. Well, Palmer was about 10, 15, 20 years older than me and probably 100 pounds more. Needless to say, he did not keep up with me and the guy that I was chasing. And, of course, I was working for Lieutenant Hagan. We talked about him last week. And Lieutenant Hagan is asking me on the radio where I'm at. I have no clue where I'm at. I've only been working here a week. I've ran like 6 blocks.
I'm by the street light.
And I look up, and I have no clue. I know that it's dark outside, and there are a bunch of houses, and I don't know. And Palmer, we got back in the car. I guess Lieutenant had got on him a little bit, and Palmer was like, don't ever do that again.
That's gonna make you hiccup.
Don't make me think about it. It won't.
You just gotta hold your breath.
All right. Okay, this is episode 3 that we're doing now, right? So,
Already.
Yeah, we got mine out of the way, so I don't have to talk so much this time. It's your turn. And
My time to shine.
We're gonna do the Chief, Cap, and Chap show, episode 3. We're gonna talk to Jon Broom about his history, what led him into this role of patrol captain that he's been in for
3 weeks, 4 weeks.
3 years.
3 years.
3 years, maybe June. I think July.
Probably seems a lot longer.
Oh yeah, a lifetime.
Yeah, your hair was black before you became a captain.
That's you're completely right about that. It has.
You should see mine like 5 years ago. I'm telling you, in 5 years, just like whoosh, I'm gray.
I don't know if you ever seen the pictures before where they show the picture of the president.
Yeah.
Prior to election and then after they leave office.
Yeah.
And typically that's 4 to 8 years or whatever. Mm-hmm. And there's a noticeable difference. So I'm sure the president's under a lot more stress than I am. But
That's why I'm not going to run for president.
Yeah. Do you know how pretty I would look if I didn't work in law enforcement?
How pretty would you look?
I don't know. It's got to be better. It's got to be better. Well, so we're going to talk today with Captain Jon Broom and talk about his upbringing, maybe whatever you want to talk about, and just Jason and I maybe ask a few questions, and like we did last time with me, and I guess we're just going to kick this thing off.
Yeah. So I think a good place to start is tell us where you started, where you grew up.
I grew up in Dunklin County in Campbell, small town, maybe 1,000, 1,300 people or something like that, I've always gotten flack over our mascot, which is a camel. And, we're the camels. And
did you say a camel?
Like a camel.
Like
you find in the
Sally
desert.
the camel?
And something that's funny about that is,
nothing scares you on the athletic field like a camel.
Is this a one-hump camel or
the
two-hump
fighting
camel?
camels.
I'm not sure how many humps it had. But it's funny.
I didn't know that.
How you grow up in small towns and you're kind of isolated, especially back then before really the internet obviously is out and social media, and things like that. But so you're kind of secluded in small towns, especially back then. To me, I thought everybody's mascot was a camel, and then I didn't really learn that till later.
Then you realized only Campbell's mascot is the camel.
Yeah. And well, actually, there's a university. I want to say maybe in Eastern Tennessee.
I'll just go with it.
It's their mascot is camel. Too.
I'd like to know how that started. Like how, you know what I mean? Is it
You've
just
never been to Campbell?
Alliteration? Is that what?
Have you never been to Campbell?
I've been through it.
They have a ton of camels there.
Is that right? I wouldn't know. I stayed on the highway and kept going south.
But I grew up in Campbell, and it's an agricultural type community and small town. Parents, had great parents. Very fortunate in that situation. My dad was an accountant, and of course, growing up, you think to yourself, sometimes it's kind of natural to kind of follow your dad's lead, maybe get into business or something like that. And I saw him sitting behind a desk all the time, just punching away on a calculator. And I thought, man, there's no way I would ever really do that. But really kind of early on, 11, 12 years old, I knew that I wanted to be a police officer. Never really strayed from that path.
Why do you think that is? What?
You know, people have asked me that before, and you know, the typical answer when somebody asks somebody, "Why did you become a police officer or a first responder?" is, you know, I want to get it out and serve the community, make my community better. And of course, that's just kind of the standard issue response to that. But my answer is, I have no clue. You know, we talk about a greater calling sometimes. You know, we've talked about that before with you and getting into being a chaplain and things like that. To me, really, it's the reason why I did is not even explainable. You know, it was the path that was set out for me long before, and something that, you know, I think maybe while I'm on this earth that I really never will quite understand why. Maybe later, you know, maybe someday I'll understand, or sometime, but not now. I really don't know. You know, this was the path. I know this is a path. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And
so what was at 11 or 12? Then was there something that one day when you went, you know, I think that's what I want to do?
You know, no, it wasn't really. There wasn't. Sometimes people will say, well, there was a police officer in my town, or there was a TV show, kind of like with you, that kind of you know, sparked your interest. But me, there wasn't really any singular event. It was just like, this is what you're going to do, and you know, I had no doubts from, you know, a young age of 11 or 12 years old to really, I have some doubts today. Like, man, I need to, you know, I'm kind of getting towards the end of my career. I need to be thinking about what I'm going to do later on in life. But then I think to myself, no, I think, you know, I want to keep doing this job until, you know, I literally or physically can't do it anymore. So I think this is just really kind of who I am.
What'd your parents think about that? Did you tell them when you were that age, or did you wait and flesh that out later? Or?
No, not really. I never really, you know, we never really had those conversations. You know, of course, when you get, you know, junior, senior in high school, sophomore in high school, you know, you start having those conversations with your parents about what you're going to do. And, you know, I said, hey, I want to, you know, of course, another part of my story is, other than being a police officer, I thought I was going to be a professional baseball player, just like most high school athletes think, hey, I'm going to go on to the next level and someday I'm going to be a professional baseball player. Well, I had those aspirations too. But, you know, of course, if those didn't work out, then I was going to be a police officer. Did play college baseball, played junior college baseball for a couple of years, but still really knew that, you know, the chances of really getting to that next level, even, you know, going on to a Division I school or even minor league or something like that, was slim to none. But they were still kind of just hopes and dreams. But really, you know, that whole time I was still going through the criminal justice major in college and stuff like that. And really, that was really what my path was.
Where were you going to college?
Well, I started out at Poplar Bluff at Three Rivers and played over there for a year. And I didn't know, of course, you know, I'm kind of an open book, so this is kind of embarrassing to say, but I am an open book. I wasn't ever the greatest student in the world. And so when I go to college, the first day that my instructor says, hey, I don't care if you come to class or not. You know, if you pass, you pass. If you don't, you don't.
He said that to the
wrong
wrong
person. Well, that's all I heard.
Really?
So anyway, I earned myself an academic red shirt my first year. And I was kind of confused about that too, because our colors were black and gold. You know, Three Rivers colors are black and gold. And the coach tells me, congratulations, you just earned yourself an academic red shirt. I'm like, Coach, our colors are black and gold. What am I going to be wearing, a red shirt? No, that means you practice, you work out with the team every single day, but you don't play. So, you know, that first year was kind of tough. And, you know, I was kind of at that point where I was like ready to just kind of, you know, grow up a little bit and, you know, get on my career path, and kind of took a year off, and then got a call from a coach over at Dyersburg and said, hey, you'd be willing to come over here and play some baseball for us and come visit schools. Went over there to Dyersburg State, and played 2 years. Loved it. Probably the best 2 years of my baseball that I ever played. So I was already kind of, you know, 3 years into, I was 21 years old, and it's like, okay, yeah, the writing's on the wall as far as like going on to that next level or whatever. So really kind of focused on the criminal justice. Ended up graduating with the associate's degree in criminal justice, and that would be the summer of 1996. Started the police academy right after graduation. I got that 2-year degree, and went to SEMO Police Academy.
During that time you're growing up, did you know any police officers? I mean,
you know, I remember one time specifically when I was, you know, getting ready for this podcast, kind of thinking about, you know, what really kind of influenced my criminal justice background, and really couldn't put my finger on one thing. But I do remember there was a police officer one time that spent a little bit of time with me, and he's like, hey, come over here and sit in the car, and we're going to run some radar. So I remember that being pretty cool.
He didn't stop you, right?
Well, I think that was
because
kind
that's
of
what
his.
Highway Patrol does. They tell you to sit in the car when.
No, it was not a traffic stop situation, but I think small town, is kind of maybe that way of that officer kind of saying, hey, because I'm 16, 17 years old. That was maybe kind of his way of explaining, hey, you might want to slow down a little bit because we got these radars in our car. So he showed me how it worked that day and everything. It was, it was pretty interesting to me to see that as a young kid, but that wasn't really like the big factor that made me, choose the path that I'm on today.
So you said were you a good student in school though? I mean, you said the academic red shirt and those types of things, but that kind of came from them saying you don't have to be a good student. But did you take serious education? And
probably that once I learned that you had to have a 2.0 GPA to be able to play baseball. So that was always really kind of my motivation was like, oh, hey, I just want to get this 2.0 so I could be out here playing baseball. And so, I started focusing a little bit harder and taking the academic side a little bit more serious. And of course, my GPA improved greatly. And then, of course, later in my life, I went back and ended up getting my bachelor's degree from Southeast Missouri State. And it's interesting enough is your GPA improves when you start paying for your own tuition.
Yeah.
So
I can see that. I'm sure that would be the case.
Yeah, I ended up actually made the dean's list at Southeast Missouri State before I graduated. And I'm telling you, if you would have told me when I was a 21-year-old kid or a 21-year-old or 20-year-old college student out of the gate that I was going to make the dean's list someday, I thought you'd been crazy. But
I think that's why it's so important for people to find what they're really interested in, because if you have that passion about something, you're really going to strive and try to do well.
Yeah, I think, kind of to go along with that, once I saw that writing on the wall that, hey, there's a bigger reason why you go on and get that higher education and those more technical skills and studying and what you're going to do for your career, you start taking it more seriously. So.
In those early years, who were some role models? Maybe in your later years of high school or maybe in a college, role models, people that you looked up to, people that impacted your life, and why? I
had some really great elementary and that I remember to this day, high school teachers. Very fortunate in having those folks that were kind of understanding of my lack of my academic skills and worked with me in different ways. But really, probably the first person that really stood out to me in the criminal justice field was an instructor at Three Rivers, Mr. Thompson. And I was trying to remember his first name before I came over here, and I'm wanting to say it was either John or Paul. But Mr. Thompson was a retired highway patrolman, ended up leading the criminal justice program at Three Rivers. And just listening to him and his stories, kind of talking about, his job as a highway patrolman and some of the things that they were doing just really interested me. He was really good at telling stories and about his career and kind of war stories, but then also kind of integrating them into what he was trying to teach. So he was probably the first influential person. And as far as the education and getting trained and getting into this career field. And then another one was Dr. Brown with Southeast Missouri State University.
Oh, yeah.
He was a director at the police academy there at Southeast Missouri State. And Tom Beardsley, he was one of the lead instructors. Carl Kennison, he was former chief police in.
He's probably a sergeant then, wasn't he?
Yeah, he actually taught me how to do my emergency vehicle operations, and so those guys really kind of stuck out to me. Before I really got that first job and had those people that I were working for, people training me, and my chiefs and sergeants and lieutenants. But those guys really kind of stuck out to me.
Yeah,
Good.
Kennison did good. I mean, he ended up being the chief Cape for a while.
Yeah, and
then wasn't he a professor after that?
Yeah, I'm one to think that I think he was a chair, the criminal justice chair at Southeast Missouri State, and I'm not sure where he's ended up now.
But also knows how to do emergency vehicle operations too. He taught our class too.
Yeah, he was very good at communications. I think he was PIO too at some point at Cape Girardeau Police Department, and just I remember watching his interviews, and I'm like, man, that guy he was so good. He could be. You would think he was like as good as the reporter or the media that was reporting
very
on whatever.
Steady, very calm,
very good
confident.
in communications. Yeah.
So, what was your first job after college?
Well, I graduated CMO Law Enforcement Academy, and kind of like what Chief was talking about, you just basically just shotgun applications everywhere and put them, in Jonesboro Police Department. I think Jefferson City, just put them out and applied at the Minor Police Department. I didn't apply at Sikeston for some reason. I'm not sure, but just put a bunch of applications out. And Minor PD was actually the first place that called me and said, "Hey, would you come in and do an interview?" And I'm like, "Sure." And Tom Mitchell was the chief of police out there. And I remember that day, I felt like we talked about everything but law enforcement, criminal justice. Tom was a really laid back guy. And we talked a lot about baseball and just kind of where I came from, my background and things like that. And, it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't a lot of law enforcement police department questions. It was just really kind of getting to know me. And of course, this is before really cell phones were around, but you didn't have one. Unless they just weren't very popular. So I got home that evening, and my dad says, "Well, how did I'm still living at home after I got out of college and stuff?" And he says, "Well, how'd the interview go?" I was like, "Well, he was asking me what size shirt, what size pants I wore." So I'm like, "I think that's a pretty good sign." And I'll be darned, it wasn't maybe 30, 40 minutes later. He said, "Hey," he said, "I think I want to hire you," and he said, "I have to take it in front of the city council and." They have to give me the blessings to hire you and sign off on it. And he's like, "But I want you to come to work for me." So that was kind of where I got my start.
So I'm interested because your story is a little different than Chief's with, he's in ag and selling and doing those types of things. You're knowing from 11, 12 years old, you wanted to do this. And now it's that day. You've gotten hired, you've gotten your uniform, and it's the first day of work. Tell me about that. What was it like as you got prepared for that, and then as you get to the department and start your first shift?
Well, it's we talk about this a lot about as far as like what you learn in the police academy, and of course I had an associate's degree, so I had some exposure to the criminal justice system and how it worked and how police work kind of worked even before I went to the police academy. But there's nothing really like learning about the profession until you start doing it. And I'm going to tell you, I was absolutely so green in the law enforcement profession of being out and doing the job. I didn't know what the phonetic alphabet was. And the phonetic alphabet, of course, is what, it's A as in Adam, B as in boy. Each letter has a word that you associate with it. So whenever you're talking on the radio, they understand what you're saying, instead of saying A, B, or C or whatever. I didn't even know the phonetic alphabet. I didn't know the 10 codes. I didn't know anything, nothing. And in fact, started, just not knowing any of that stuff. And, one of my lieutenant out there at the time, we became pretty good friends later. And he had this conversation with me one time after I'd worked out there for a year or two. And he's like, he's like, from early on, he's like, "I didn't think you were going to make it." He was like, you came in one day and just boom, you picked it up and you got your feet underneath you and,
I remember you being pretty busy out there, and the reason I say that is because I was relatively new here and y'all would pick up some of our people. And that's when I first saw you. You would pick somebody up and you'd bring them over, bring them downstairs to book in. We'd have to book them in and all that stuff. And then, next thing I know, you're bringing somebody else in, and then somebody else like, "Who is this guy?" He's always bringing us people.
Well, it's Minor was a little bit different back then. The outlet mall was just really. I can't remember what year they had it built. It was there prior to me starting, but it was kind of a busy place, a bustling place. Lambert's had it was new kind of out there. It had moved out to Minor, so they had a new location. And then the outlet mall was really busy. It had a lot of hotels out there. So you had that traffic during the daytime, but they also had a lot of nightlife. Basically, all of the nightlife that existed in Sikeston and Minor.
What was it, the Double Nickel that was out there?
All the nightlife was really on that side of town. So you had the Double Nickel. I think it was Double Nickel and then JD's at some point. You had the Ramada Inn. And then Diana's Lounge. And so every night of the week, there were certain nights of the week that usually I think maybe Tuesdays and Thursdays were big nights at the Ramada Inn because they had karaoke. And then Friday nights was the big night at JD's or Double Nickel. And then usually Saturdays. And then, a couple nights in between that you'd have Diana's too. So really the biggest thing that you, as a police officer, you dealt with out there was bar fights at those locations. And when I say a bar fight, I mean there was, JD's, there might be 150, 200 plus people in there. So you can imagine it's like what you see on TV. The chairs are going through the air and everything like that. So you had the bar fights that you had to deal with, and then of course with those and being that nightlife activity, there's a lot of alcohol and a lot of people drinking. So really, you know, when you're starting out in law enforcement new, you know, you're really just trying to kind of find your niche. Well, for me, it was really traffic. I worked a lot of traffic and writing a lot of speeding tickets. You know, we had the interstate out there and DWIs. You know, I think at one time the most DWIs I'd wrote in 1 year was about 50 to 60 DWIs, which is a lot. I mean, there are probably some departments around here that I don't even think our entire department writes 50 or 60 DWIs a year combined now, but back then it was different. But, you know, I'd get about 50, 60 DWI arrests a night and really felt like I was really good at them. So I became a Type 2 supervisor, which I ran all the maintenance and training on the BAs and stuff like that. And that was kind of getting my foot in the door, you know, really kind of finding my niche, the first niche that I found. I've got a lot of them through 29 plus years. I've had a lot of niches, but that was really kind of my first one.
At 50 or 60 a year, that's quite a bit. That's a large number.
Yeah, the most I ever got in one night was 3. I got arrested 3 DWIs in one night. And of course, if you're familiar with law enforcement or police officer, you know how much paperwork is involved in DWI.
Oh, yeah.
There is a lot. I mean, it's a three-page type, single-page report, and that's just your narrative. That's not counting the air form and all the associated paperwork with booking and all that. It's a lot of paperwork. But
so what do you remember as like as being an officer, some of your toughest challenges, or maybe one of your toughest challenges that stuck with you during that time?
Early on, you know, it's a lot of the things that that happen to you early on in your career. I don't really think that you. It's weird, but we talk. You know, I think there's a morbid curiosity. It doesn't really necessarily maybe take a toll on you early on or starting out. As the years go on, they start weighing on you. I think you get a little bit older too. You experience some things yourself maybe, and then things that happen that you're exposed to may really hit home for you. You know, whether it's the death of a child or the death of a parent or something like that. You draw some similarities in something that maybe you went through, and
right.
They can kind of be more challenging to deal with.
Were you single then?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I was married to the job. I would get to work. I would literally come to work 2 hours before my shift just to be at the police station, and they would have to tell me to go home.
Yeah.
I mean, it was so much fun to me that I wanted to do it 24/7. Oh yeah. Yeah. We call that, when a guy has the blue flame coming out their rear. I'm giving the G version here. Yeah, I definitely had that.
Yeah.
I was just go all the time and just big into traffic and stopping cars and making arrests and writing tickets and things like that early on.
How long did you work in minor?
5 years.
Oh, wow.
Started there in 1996, and then 2001 came to Sikeston.
So you were here, and you came as a transfer just to a street officer?
Yes. So there were a couple of guys that, of course I developed some friendships over there, and there were 2 or 3 of us that said, hey, the first one was like, I'm interested in going to Sikeston, and we're like, hey, well, you go ahead and go on over there and tell us how it works out for you. And because, we'd always heard these stories about Sikeston, and this and that, and, the agencies got along great, but there was always kind of like, it's kind of a hard place to work and everything like that. And so the 2 or 3 guys were like, you go ahead and go over there and tell us how you like it. Well, he goes over there, and he was here for about 6 months, and he was like, it's great. He's like, you guys ought to come. So, we're like, okay. And so he kind of tested the water for us. And about 3 or 4 of us actually came over here about the same time and came to work here.
So was it a difficult switch to go from a smaller department like minor to Sikeston, especially with them being very close to each other? What was the difference, and was it difficult?
I really try to reach out to these younger officers and talk to them kind of about starting out and the feeling of being overwhelmed sometimes. And I tell them, I'm like, listen, I'm going to tell you, if I hadn't started a minor just to kind of get my feet under me as being a police officer, because like I said, I didn't know the phonetic alphabet or the 10 codes or anything. If I hadn't got out there and kind of got my feet under me before I really kind of transitioned to Sikeston, I don't know if I would have made it, because that lieutenant that I had in minors, he even questioned if I was going to be able to make it out there. And it's a lot slower paced. There's a lot of self-initiated activities out there versus when you come here. Sometimes a shift can be just completely reactive. And what I mean by reactive is, the call comes into dispatch and then dispatch dispatches you to it. Well, you have no control over that, okay? So if you're on an afternoon shift here, it can just be literally just, you come to roll call 15 minutes before your shift starts, and those calls could be backed up waiting on you, and so you'll just literally run from call to call to call. But I found that when I came here, I really enjoyed it, and I kind of found another kind of one of my niches, as far as being a problem solver, as a young officer out on the street, and you get called to these, whether it be a domestic or a theft or something like that, or, just whatever difficulty or problem that person's facing that day, they're looking for you to maybe help solve that problem. And so I really found a lot of satisfaction and joy in being able to help somebody solve their problem, or at least maybe calm a situation down and sit down with them and kind of play that referee in the middle, of a domestic, especially, or an argument or something like that. Okay, I'm going to sit here in the middle and you explain why you're upset, and you're going to listen. And then when they get done talking, then you're going to explain and try to help them understand why you're upset. So you kind of play that referee. I really like it when they come to an understanding and this person gets to hear what that person had to say. And so then they kind of get to listen to each other's story. That's a really great ending. Now, sometimes that's not the case, where it's like, we all three just reach an impasse. It's like, okay, we're all going to have to separate for the night,
Yeah, and that sounds relatively easy to do. It's very difficult to do.
It is extremely difficult to do because you have to be in really good control of your emotions, because it's very easy to get caught up in the emotions of whatever call you're on, and you have to remain calm and then try to communicate that to another person, because you go on these calls too, they're going to feed off of whatever energy you have too. If you go into a call and you're extremely excited or upset, they're going to feed into that, and then of course the officer can feed into their emotions as well. Right. So you have to remain in control and communicate and try to rationalize everything with them, and hopefully, come to a successful conclusion. A lot of times people think police officers just want to go out and make an arrest or whatever, and that's really not the case. The best scenario to end that is that this person's able to go their way, or this person's able to go that way, or to de-escalate the situation and the officer leave. Because
and then you get to go back patrolling instead of taking yourself off the street and have to go to booking. So it works out for everybody.
Yeah. So that's really the goal, is just for everything to end peacefully.
So when you transition like that from minor to Sikeston, and you've been at minor for 5 years, you've made it up to supervisor in that department. When you came over here, was there did you have to, for lack of a better term, start over as going through field training with a field training officer? And how was that, going from a supervisor at one department to then being in FTO at a new department?
Well, I never was a supervisor specific, like a title sergeant or anything like that. A type 2 supervisor is kind of what I referred to, that you might be getting confused with. A type 2 supervisor basically just oversees the breath alcohol testing. So I never was a supervisor until I came to Sikeston. Gotcha. And then, of course, that was way on later down my career. And really early on, I had no interest in being a supervisor. I kind of wanted to go out and do my own thing and be that officer and just answer my calls on the radio and stuff like that. But yeah, I was assigned an FTO. Steve Palmer, he was a former minor officer that ended up coming to Sikeston. He was my FTO, and I really enjoyed working with Steve Palmer. I had a great relationship even out in minor. We worked a lot of midnights together, and I remember one of the things that Steve Palmer told me was, real cops listen to Coast AM. Okay, and
truer words have never been spoken.
Yeah. And that is exactly true. If you're a police officer and you go to any training conference, I don't care where it's at, and you mention Coast AM, I guarantee you the cops know exactly what show you're talking about, because it comes on at midnight.
AM radio,
1400 if you're in Sikeston, and it comes on at midnight and it goes off at 5 a.m. So that really kind of And this is before podcasts too, so it wasn't like you could just turn your phone on and listen to a podcast.
Yeah.
So you had a 5-hour AM radio show, and they talked about just paranormal stuff, ghost stories, chupacabra, aliens, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah,
and that show had me scared so many times. I was scared to even get out of the
aliens,
car in the middle of the night.
It was crazy. They're coming from the high desert.
The kingdom of Nye.
So you're listening to that.
Yeah, it's like what time did it come on? Like midnight. It's kicked off at midnight.
Came on at midnight.
Man, it was great.
So you'd be out patrolling, listening to that, and thinking somebody Bigfoot's hiding around the corner.
Well, around Halloween they always had of course the show was called Coast to Coast, but on Halloween it was called Ghost to Ghost, and so they would have a night where people would call in all night long telling ghost stories, and of course you're out in the middle of the night. It's 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. It's dark, and you're out checking buildings or whatever, in the middle of the night for looking for burglars, and it's kind of scary out there. And then you've just listened to this ghost story for the last 2 hours. You're like, you get a little nervous, you know. But anyway, just Steve Palmer, I really enjoyed working with him and thought a lot of him. And then of course I come over here and he's my FTO. And a funny story about early on in my FTO. So if you have experience and you come to work for Sikeston specifically, you do kind of a lateral. It's kind of a brief FTO period. The normal FTO period, if you don't have experience, is 12 weeks. So I did a short FTO period, I think maybe 5 or 6 weeks. But the rule is your FTO or the recruit never leaves their FTO. They have to be with them within basically sight or almost like arm's length away for that period of time. Well, the first week or so, Palmer's like, yeah, go ahead. Of course, we've known each other and worked with him. He knew I was capable of doing the job and everything. He's like, go ahead and drive tonight. He's like, you're really, we're not supposed to really drive yet, but go ahead and drive. Well, it's probably because he wanted to take a nap while I was driving. Anyway, he's like, yeah, go ahead and drive. Well, I'll be darned. We got in a vehicle pursuit, and this was like a week or so in and I'd been in vehicle pursuits before I came to work here, so that wasn't really any big deal or anything. But then, of course, they pull over and they bail out and take off running. Well, Palmer was about 10, 15, 20 years older than me and probably 100 pounds more. Needless to say, he did not keep up with me and the guy that I was chasing. And, of course, I was working for Lieutenant Hagan. We talked about him last week. And Lieutenant Hagan is asking me on the radio where I'm at. I have no clue where I'm at. I've only been working here a week. I've ran like 6 blocks.
I'm by the street light.
And I look up and I have no clue. I know that it's dark outside and there are a bunch of houses and I don't know. And Palmer, we got back in the car. I guess Lieutenant had got on him a little bit, and Palmer was like, don't ever do that again. So, but no, went through my FTO program here, and even I'd already been in law enforcement 5 years, and I remember, getting through my FTO program and getting in the car by myself. And I kind of almost had those same feelings again all over once I'm in that car by myself as I did the first day that I started in minor. I remember looking down at the radio in the cars that we have, looking at that mobile radio, thinking to myself, please don't call me, because I was scared to death. Like,
wow,
yeah, am I going to find the street? Because there's a lot. Even though Sikeston's small, if you think about it, you have to be able to get to those streets. Somebody's house, somebody calls and they're needing help. Like right now, you got to be able to drive right there, the quickest way, the shortest route to get there as fast as you can, as safely as you can.
That's one of the toughest things to learn if you're not from here, the street names and how to get there fast.
Yeah, even to this day, I carry what I call a little street locator. Basically has all the, if I know it's off of Kings Highway or something, it'll have all the streets is listed off. So occasionally, of course, I'm, very familiar with all the streets, but occasionally they'll throw one out every once in a while. I'm like, especially if it's a new street, I'm like, where the heck is that?
Yeah, they do. They having this development that stuff happens. They'll pop up a new street, and you're like, I don't even know. Is that even in our town? Yeah, it is. We just haven't been there.
Yeah. So occasionally they'll still throw out a street, or once in a while I'll have to look. I'm like, oh, where is that? Okay, oh yeah, that's a new subdivision or whatever. But anyway, went through my FTO program and really enjoyed my lieutenant. I had a great relationship with him, and I learned as far as like being on the job and having that first really good teacher, supervisor person. That was my lieutenant. I learned more about being a police officer from that lieutenant than I did in any officer or lieutenant or supervisor or anything that I'd had at that moment in my career. He taught me so much about just doing the job, treating people right. And I think really one of the more important things that he taught me was empathy, think when you go to these calls and and you're dealing with somebody, think about the situation that they're going through your own eyes, and just kind of having that understanding, and just he always was very good at articulating, explaining reasons why. I think Chief talked about this last week. He wasn't that kind of supervisor that would just tell you to do something. He would explain to you the reasons why you did it, and so he was really good. Now my sergeant at the time, for whatever reason, that guy just did not like me, and we even had this conversation. I remember when he left here several years ago. Well, it was more than several years. It was probably about 20 years ago. We had this conversation. I was like, Sarge, man, you were having this party, and our squad got along real good. I was like, I just feel like you never did like me. And I think a normal person would think, oh man, he'd lie to you and basically, I never had a problem. He looked straight at me and is like, yeah, I didn't. I'm like, why? He's like, I don't know. I just didn't like you. But my lieutenant, and I.
You appreciate the honesty.
Yeah, that was just his personality. He was just, that was just how he was. But I remember, and of course, I tell these young officers too, I passed down a lot of things that I've kind of experienced throughout my career, and that's one of them. Some people always have personality difficulties or things like that. Maybe not necessarily complaining about a supervisor or not liking a certain supervisor, but there's just personality differences. And I always tell them that story. I'm like, listen, I know how you feel because I had a sergeant when I pulled in the back parking lot to go to work and I saw his car there and I knew my lieutenant wasn't going to be there, that it was going to be a bad shift. And, that I would literally just like want to throw up thinking to myself, oh my gosh, this guy is going to be on me hard for the next 8 hours for everything.
So is that what would make it tough? Is they would just ride you and pick out every little thing?
I just felt like I couldn't do anything right. He would tell me, to do something, and I would do it exactly the way that guy wanted me to do it, and it just wasn't ever good enough. And but come to find out, it's because he just didn't like me. So he even admitted to it. So and it's funny because if he was sitting in this room right now, he would probably have a big grin on his face, smiling. And he would say, "Yeah, I didn't like you." It was, I never had any, it was never any personal feelings or it was just his personality. I think that's. And I just accepted it at that,
So what year did you go to Detective Division?
That's an interesting story because I didn't want to be a detective. And my sergeant at that time was Jim Tigert. He's still here in town. I think works for BMU. And Jim Tigert used to work for us, and he was a sergeant, good sergeant. He taught me a lot as well.
Yeah, he was good.
And he had that conversation where they put out the email or whatever, the notice, say, hey, there's a position open in Detective Division, and who wants to apply? So submit a letter of interest or whatever. And I was like, I really like just being a cop, just being out in the car, being in a black and white, out handling my calls and trying to help people and on that level. And I just didn't really have any interest in it. Kind of like supervision. I had no interest in being a supervisor. And Sergeant Tigert, I think it was like on that Wednesday or Thursday, we're supposed to turn these letters of interest in by Friday at like 5:00. And he says, hey, I see you haven't turned your letter, of interest in to be a detective. He's like, why haven't you? I'm like, Sarge, I was like, I like being out here on the street, and he's like, man, he said, you really need to turn that letter in to be a detective. And I was like, I don't really want to. And so this is like on a Wednesday, and I thought about it on Thursday, and then Friday rolls around. And of course I have a daughter by this time. I had a daughter when I was 28 years old. And, so, the benefit of being in Detective Division, now it's a stressful job, and we'll probably talk about that later. It's stressful and a lot of demands on you, but really for the most part, other than being on call, you were on call a week at a time. You might get called out in the middle of the night, but whatever. But it's a lot more stable schedule. And so I was a single dad at this time, and the idea of having a stable schedule, 8 to 5 Monday through Friday minus the call week, was going to help me a lot more, raising my daughter. She was probably 3 or 4 years old at that time. And, I thought I'm going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and put him for a detective. So I waited the last minute, and I'll be darned, I ended up getting the Detective Division job. And, man, that was, here we go again. There was a lot of fear in that. I wanted to, there's a lot of pressure solving those cases, and it's really on you, as far as, you get assigned that case, you're the one that's going to be either
the end of the line.
You're going to be the hero or the zero,
Yeah.
basically. You're going to come in and solve this case and make somebody's day and make that arrest or make the community safer by putting somebody that's really bad away where they need to be, or you're going to be a failure. And so there's a lot of pressure there, and I was pretty scared about that too. So yeah, I got a couple of stories for that too.
So when you go, like yesterday, you're a road officer, today you become a detective, do they just go, okay, here's your cases, good luck? I mean, what does the training look like from being a road officer to a detective?
Well, that's a funny story too that really kind of sticks out to me too, and I've told this story a bunch of times. And I remember getting my first. There's a couple funny first stories there. I get my first case, and of course, it was kind of back then. You had it in a file folder, and Sergeant Donner, he's Captain Donner here. He's still here with us in the department, but he was a sergeant in charge of CIU then, and go in his office, and he's going to give me my first case, and he hands me a file, and I open it up, and it's like a child sexual abuse case. And I'm like, ugh, like this is not what you see on TV as far as like being the cool stuff with the nice suit and like, going out.
You know who was working those before you come up there?
Probably you.
It was me. Yeah. And I told Sergeant Donner, I was like, hey,
Broom's
coming up.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
I was like, this is an opportunity for me.
So yeah, and those are the most difficult cases, and on so many levels. But like me going from the street to getting that first case, like you hate getting those as that first reporting officer going out on the street. You hate getting those calls because one, nobody wants to see a child get hurt or have to go through anything that's terrible as an officer. But then I'm thinking, oh my gosh, now I'm going to open myself up to a whole nother level of being exposed to this. And but he gave me that first case, and I got. Actually, Chief is the one you talk about training. I got assigned in the same office as Chief. We were in the old building over there that used to be an old post office. And so the detectives kind of, there were singular offices, but there might be a couple of desks in there. So I was in the office with him. So he kind of was my mentor, my trainer, and took me up to NASV, the Network and Sexual Violence, is in Cape at that time, which is still around. It's in Jackson now, but they still do all of our forensic interviews and stuff related to child abuse.
Yeah, they do great work up there.
Absolutely. They were so far ahead of the bar.
Well,
30 years ago.
I'll tell you, before they came along, we were, and it really is terrible to do this, but that's the way it was at the time. We would interview like an 11-year-old kid that was sexually abused or something like that. And it's so difficult because you can accidentally lead kids around. That's why that Network Against Sexual Violence, who have those trained interviewers, that they do a fabulous job with that. And it's a load off of detectives because they don't have to do that, and they're just great at doing that. So
absolutely, yeah. And not only are they're forensic interviewers is what their title is, and so they're not only trained on how to ask questions to these children in a way that is not leading, that's presentable to the court and what's admissible in court. You have to ask certain questions in a way that you're not leading a witness, and so they're trained in that. But they're also trained in trauma-informed care as far as asking questions in a way that do not re-traumatize that victim. And so really, I got that first case and then came to the understanding that I was going to be working a lot of these. And I just everything that NASV was doing, I was eating it with a spoon. Any training I could go to that was related to those type of calls, anything I could learn from them, I wanted to learn, and I got pretty good at them.
They loved you up there. I remember that.
And Chief mentioned this, that NASV does the hardest part. And I always, even to this day, I tell them, I'm like, you guys do the hardest part. You get that forensic interview, and they would prepare that interview. It would be a typed out, basically a statement from that victim. They would also provide you like a video of that interview. Of course, some other drawings and things like that of how the child identified the parts of the body and things like that, because everybody uses different terminology to identify different parts of the body and stuff like that. So they hand you this nice, neat little package, and so everything that's related to the victim in that case, they take care of. Now, I mean, the hard part, another hard part, but I don't feel like it's as hard as the first part. Dealing with the victims is getting that confession or that dealing with the suspect and bringing them in, because I'm going to tell you, you bring a guy in or a girl that's been victimizing children, and you've never met this person before. One, they don't want to talk about what they've been doing, and two, they sure don't want to talk about it to a stranger, a complete stranger, and then three, they don't want to talk about it to the police because they're getting ready to lock them up for a long time.
Yeah, right. They're well aware.
Yeah. So the interviews are really, really important, because a lot of times in these sexual abuse cases, there's no physical evidence. Very rarely. I mean, 99.9% of the times, there's no injuries to the body, and there's no physical evidence.
So you spent a lot of time in detective division and doing those types of cases, and then you left Sikeston and went to
Southeast Missouri State University. I worked up there for a couple years as campus police officer, and ended up at the Cape County Sheriff's Department.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, that's the first time I remember seeing you, is when you worked in Cape, because I was working at a church in Cape at that time, and I went to Subway every Tuesday, and I think you ate Subway every day, and so I remember seeing you ordering food, and
I still do every
Still
day.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Subway every day, huh?
Just about, yeah.
So I found that interesting, when we connected later, over the last 5-6 years, and I thought, where do I know this guy from? And it hit me one day, that's the Subway cop.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, so you spent some time there. How long were you in Cape area?
Went to Southeast Missouri State University in 2009, and I think I worked there till maybe 11, and then worked Sheriff's Department from 2011 to 13.
And then you just had to get back to Sikeston.
You know what? Really, I talk about Campbell being my home, but I feel like at this point in my life, I've almost lived in Sikeston longer than I've lived anywhere else. And really, Sikeston's kind of became my home. And, I really missed the job down here. And I called up the chief at that time, and I was like, hey, chief, I want to come back. And he's like, when do you want to start? And so came back as a patrolman again.
Really? So you just jumped back as just a
patrolman,
street patrolman, and
PSO, start all over.
Do you have to do FTO again?
I think I rode with somebody for like a week, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
You keep your old number though, the old badge number. Or you got a new one?
My first badge number here was 230, and when I came back, I was 333.
Okay.
Yeah.
333. That's a lucky number.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we're in the 500s now. So
yeah.
That's how old you are. I'm just saying.
All right. So that was like you said, 2013.
13. Yeah.
Okay.
Come back 13.
And then work your way back up. Did you go back to detective division?
No.
Okay.
That opportunity never came. And so I had an opportunity to test for sergeant, and it was funny because some of my supervisors and sergeants, I can remember being as little kids or working at the gas station or delivering pizzas or something like that. And I'm like, man, I remember that guy when he was a little kid, and now he's my supervisor. So it's like, I got to do something here. So I decided to test for sergeant and became a sergeant. So that was my first experience in supervision.
So what year is that?
That would have been maybe 2016, maybe.
Oh, okay.
15, something like that.
Yeah. All right. And so now you go sergeant, and then you make your way to lieutenant.
Lieutenant, yeah.
And you really, how long were you a sergeant or a lieutenant longer?
Well, 2018, I became a lieutenant. So
okay.
Yeah. And then 2022, I think, is when Captain Irwin retired, and Chief mentioned this on his last podcast. He always kind of got to wait for the older guys to retire. So when he left, then it creates upward movement, and so that was when I became a patrol division captain.
So as a patrol division captain, what is your responsibilities now today?
Man, I feel like I wear a lot of hats. I spent a lot of time overseeing CIT, doing a lot of CIT stuff, which would kind of relinquish some of those responsibilities to Matt Cotner. He's doing that now. did a lot of CIT stuff, sim mapping, mental health stuff. Really, but the main part of my job is just making sure that the wheels keep turning on that patrol bus. Whether that's scheduling, discipline, complaints. Paul's also became under that patrol division thing, so I oversee
It's
Paul's.
pet and animal welfare services.
Yeah, so go out there and adopt a dog, please.
They need that. Yeah, they do.
So yeah, you wear a lot of hats, and I still, to me, it's everybody has their own ideas of what a leadership should be, but for me, really, I really respect and look towards a guy that gets out and it's always really easy to tell somebody what to do, but be out there with them, and I still like to get out there and work with the guys, and whether it's a midnight shift or whatever. And or if there's a shortage on the schedule, I'll plug myself in there and get out and work a patrol shift in the middle of the night, which Chief is like, why are you doing that? I need you here during the daytime. But and I try to explain that to me, and he gets on to me every once in a while. Hey, I need you here during the daytime. I need you out there in the middle of the night, handling calls. But I'm like, hey, this is why I'm doing it. I want them to see me out, doing the job too. And I not only that they see me out doing the job and leading that way, but I feel like you got to be out there to kind of get to feel the pulse of the streets, to know what's going on, and see how things are going within the community too. Because you could easily just seclude yourself in that office in there and not really have an idea of what's going on in the streets unless you're out there, breathing it and seeing it and just feeling the pulse of the streets.
So what's your leadership style if you had one?
Well, when I went through supervisor training, they said that I was a laissez-faire. I'm a hands-off kind of guy, and we hire these guys and we place a lot of responsibility on them, and I think a lot of them recognize it, and I want them to be able, because I really, the best teacher I think too is failing. We're all going to fail, whatever profession we have, and the best teacher is learning from your mistakes, and so I like to see guys make mistakes, that's not going to be detrimental to anyone's safety or health or anything like that, and I think they learn a lot from those mistakes, because I sure have. I've done a lot of things in 29 years. I'm like, man, I won't do that again. That was a terrible decision. Why did I even think about doing that? I won't ever go down that road again, So you learn by this job. And so, but that's kind of my style. I'm kind of a hands-off guy. Now, there are some times you'll identify certain employees or certain people where you got to be more hands-on. And of course, everybody responds differently to things too. So, but overall, I'm a laissez-faire type guy. I'm a hands-off kind of guy. If you need some help, I'm going to be here for you, and I'm going to make myself available for you. I don't care what time of night it is. You call me if you got a question or whatever. There are no stupid questions. Before you ask the question, I may be. I've done this a lot. When an officer calls and says, "Hey, even as a sergeant or lieutenant, hey, I got this scenario, or I got this question. I don't really know what to do," and I'll say, "Well, stop right there. I want you to think about the solution to your problem, what you think that you should do, and I want you to tell me what you think you should do, and then if it's not what I think is probably the best solution, then maybe I'll offer some advice to you. So go ahead and tell me what you think you should do." And 9 times out of 10, that guy's would thought that he was going to handle that situation in exactly the way that I was going to tell him.
Yeah, I think it's important, where you back up a little bit and you empower people to make those decisions. It's how they grow and build confidence. And so, like you said, most of the time they know the answer. They just don't know that they have the authority on some of those more serious situations to do those things. And they want to make sure or I know, and a lot of times they do know what to do.
Yeah, I think it's really, especially early on, it's just really building confidence of like, hey, maybe I do know what I'm kind of doing here. So, yeah.
If you could sit in a room with Jon Broom that's 23 years old, if he was sitting here next to you, what is one thing, maybe the one thing you would want to tell him?
Man, we have all day, because there's so many things. One, think about your finances, your financial situations as a young officer, or just anybody in general. Really start thinking about planning for your retirement when you're 23 years old, because guess what? I'm knocking on that door, and I'm thinking to myself, I really want to retire someday, but am I going to be financially able to? Especially you talk about having kids and things like that, and I remember when my daughter was freshman, sophomore in high school, I thought to myself, how in the world am I going to pay for college? Like the cost of college is almost half of what my salary is on a yearly basis. And I don't want to just load her down with student debt. So I would say to that young Jon Broom at 23, I'd be like, be thinking about your finances and retirement, whether it's putting $5, $10, $20, whatever you can afford, just back in some sort of retirement investment or college tuition investment fund or something like that. That would be some advice. And then two, I tell these young officers, and I don't think any of them ever have done this, but man, what I wouldn't give to have started a journal or a diary early on in my career and write down the things, the good thing that happened that day or whatever was really kind of that stuck out to me that day from the day one. Because of course, we as officers, reporting officers, we have these little notepads that we carry in our back pocket, and we get little notes from calls that we go on, whether it's somebody's reporting a theft or an assault. We write down the notes and their names and things like that. And occasionally I'll find some of those old notebooks at my home, and I just kind of flip through them, man, and it's just like, it just kind of brings back some of the things that I've thought about. But, you know, just kind of keeping track and having a journal early on and your finances and things like that are two things that really kind of stick out to me.
So you have had many different positions in your career, which you talked about. You've been in law enforcement 29 years in August. What are you most proud of?
You know, I don't really think there's one thing that really kind of sticks out to me. You know, I think at the end of the day, when I finally quit, that I just want to know that I did the best that I could, you know, and that tried to help the community the best I could. And, you know, that there are people that think, man, that dude really cared and he did a good job. You know, that's really kind of, you know, maybe if I'm looking down on him and somebody says, hey, you know, he did a good job, then I'll be proud. But, you know, personally, you know, I'm proud of my daughter. You know, that's probably my biggest accomplishment. You know, it's just she wanted to get in law enforcement, and I was like, are you sure you want to do that? Because, you know, she's lived this in her entire life from day one. And so she said that she did, but she ended up going to work for Missouri Children's Division, and she's actually working as an investigator for child abuse and sexual abuse cases. So I'm like pretty proud of that. So
that's awesome. I think one of the things that this podcast specifically with us telling our stories does is helps people see who you are, who we are. So one of the things that I think is interesting is, you know, we've talked a lot about your profession, you as a police officer. Who is Jon Broom outside of the police department?
Man, I'm just an easygoing, happy guy, you know, and I just want to be laid back and just chill and everybody get along. I don't like confrontation. I don't like seeing people upset, and, you know, I like music and just hanging out. And
I'd say they nailed the laissez-faire description.
Yeah. I got a couple dogs at home, and I tell you what, there's nothing better than just sitting outside, just hanging out with my dog. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I appreciate the story, and it's, you know, I've learned some things today that I didn't know about you, so that's pretty awesome. It's been great. Appreciate it.
Well,
yeah, and next week you get to tell your story.
Okay.
So this will be good.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, if you have any questions, want to make some suggestions for our podcast, we want to say thanks to all of you who have already reached out. I think people are pretty interested in the things that we're talking about or what we're going to talk about. We're making plans for some great episodes coming up. And so if you have suggestions, which we've already received some of those suggestions.
Yeah, we've gotten some views, some, of course, and then some emails and stuff. I think that's positive. And of course, we're just getting started. Yep. And we could certainly use some tips and advice of what we might need to do. I'd love to have that. And you can email us at chief.cap.chap@gmail.com.
Yep. So hit that to us. We'll talk to you again next week. And until then, remember,
take the high road.
Always take the high road.
Take the high road.